Hey, Bright Lights, it's Angela here, and welcome to this episode of Architecting. I am really excited today to have as my guest Sana Tabassum of To Scale. And I was really excited because I thought there was a lot of alignment with the work that Sana's doing, the problems she saw that she's on a mission to fix, and the work that we're doing in this community. So, welcome, Sana.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks for having me on.
So, can you give a little bit of your background? What led you down this path, and what is really your mission with reaching out to people with your message?
Sure. I started studying architecture in 2016, and so I'm based in London, and I graduated obviously in 2019. After which I felt like, I was supposed to go down this traditional route of becoming an architect, take a year out and work in practice. Things obviously didn't go to plan, and I spent almost that entire year just looking for a job. And so I thought to myself, there must be something else I can do with my time, build my skills, help people out is the main thing, because I found that in my undergraduate, I was often quite lost because I didn't really have that sort of background knowledge as other students did about architecture. It was all very new to me. After that, I sort of thought, okay, well, let me, start creating a blog, add some resources, tutorials, that kind of thing, to just help other people out there, like students like me. And that's where I think To Scale kind of grew from.
Oh, that's amazing. I definitely think that when we are students, we're sort of getting whiplash, right? One professor tells you one thing, another professor tells you another thing, and it's really hard to know what should I do. So I love
Yeah.
that you wanted to put those resources out there and give back. What would you say is probably the foundational element, though, in finding your way?
I think it's probably just kind of, trying everything, I suppose. Because I think because having no previous knowledge or not really knowing much about what the path entails to become an architect, for example, it was just mainly just about trying everything I could at least once and figuring out whether that was for me. And that's what I encourage a lot of other students to do as well, like regardless of where they are in their sort of journey.
That's a great point. It's like if you'd never had ice cream and somebody said to you, "What's your
Yeah.
favorite flavor?" You wouldn't be able to answer the question. Or if you'd
Hmm.
only ever had vanilla, so you do
Hmm.
have to try a lot of different things, which kind of segues into this idea of failure and the stigma around it. If you're going to try a lot of different things,
Yeah.
obviously not all of them are going to work out so well. So how do you coach people through that experimental process and help them get something meaningful that helps them make decisions?
Hmm. Yeah. So I think, how I think Instagram is one of those platforms, right? Which everyone says, well, you only really see a sort of highlight of someone's life. You only really see the good parts. People don't really like to put out, when they actually are going through tough times or when they're sort of having a creative block, for example. But I think that's not really true because you can put these things out there. It's just that not many people do, which is fair enough. But I think in terms of how do I make it a bit more normalized is just by sharing these things myself, because obviously no one's really perfect and it's not like I'm amazing at architecture. I think it's kind of like you're always learning something and you're always sort of improving your skills. So whenever I do have moments where I'm going through that creative block or I'm really stuck on a design element or something, I make sure to also share those bits too, rather than just, okay, well, here's my work and here's what I'm doing. It's actually, well, today didn't go that great because I really didn't do anything. I procrastinated, it happens. And you just have to be really, really sort of honest with your community as well. I think that's the key to kind of growing a community online too. So yeah, I think especially seeing failures as like just the next step, it's going to get you one step closer to the outcome that you wish to have, really.
So you started the blog to really be a resource for students. How has it evolved as you've gone through your own
Mm-hmm.
career journey?
So I think there's two parts to it, right? I think the main thing was to get these resources out, get some sort of tutorials out because I personally found a lack of these things on the internet. And then as the platform sort of started growing, I think the whole social media side of it was quite unexpected because I love writing. And so my main focus was on writing this blog. Whereas I'd never really thought to interact with other students in the UK and around the world. And so I then realized actually I could use this as an opportunity to grow myself as a person. So if you had spoken to me about like 2 or 3 years ago, I would have absolutely been terrified to do a podcast, for example, because I'm very sort of shy. I really don't like public speaking, that kind of thing. And so I thought, okay, well, I can start using this as an opportunity to put myself out there, not just for future purposes for getting a job or working in the industry, but actually just to improve myself as a person and try new things. So I think the key was really to just be quite consistent with things and just kind of keep going. And then eventually I realized my strengths or the things that my audience were looking for was, stuff like how to manage your time, how to kind of make sure you finish off your to-do list in an efficient way, but still make it fun. So I think that's something that architecture students really overlook is the fact that we're all trying to be super efficient and trying to get as much work as we can, but no one's really stopping and thinking about, well, am I actually enjoying this? So it's also about, I think now it's kind of about, bringing in that element and just kind of developing really healthy habits too.
Yeah, that is so important. I think it kind of starts in school where you're really through the crit system and the way
Mm-hmm.
studio classes are structured. I'm assuming it's similar in the UK as
Yeah.
it is here in the US, but what are your thoughts on that system and how that sets up a culture of design? I always like to say, because it really is sort of like this is the way and you must follow
Mm-hmm.
it. And how do you
Mm-hmm.
break that mold?
So how do I find the culture? I think for the most part, architecture school remains unchanged. I think the only difference now is that there are sort of emerging individuals who are speaking up about it and kind of offering their advice or offering some kind of solidarity or just something that makes us feel like we're not alone in this journey. So I think how you mentioned that architecture school does set you up for the way you work in practice, for example. I think that's so true, and I think stuff like that needs to change. I think it's only just beginning here, at least. People are sort of trying to rephrase the whole crit idea. They're kind of turning it into reviews, having a bit more collaboration involved. So there is scope for it to improve for sure. And I think the whole kind of education system does need another look at. But in terms of breaking the mold, I would say it's really just about, I think there's like a huge disconnect between university and practice or university and career paths in general. I think most architecture students don't necessarily realize that there is much more to your career than just going down that traditional route. I didn't realize this myself. But when I started architecture, I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna, start this journey and do the whole 7+ years and become an architect. I didn't realize that actually you could specialize in visualization. You could do, you find a niche industry you're interested in. You could do the whole social media thing if you really wanted to and start your own business. So I think that lack of knowledge is something that I'm hoping that people are starting to more, bring out a bit more and just make accessible for everyone to understand that, it's okay if you don't go down that traditional route. You don't really have to. So yeah.
That's very important. I know in the US, I'm assuming it's very, very similar. There's sort of this, well, first you're an intern, and then
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're a project architect or a designer. You got to choose. And
Mm-hmm.
then you're a project manager. And it's a very linear path with a lot of milestones and boxes to check along the way. But
Yep.
that's somebody else's career path. It may or may not be the right one for you. And a lot of the work I'm trying to promote at architecting is stop checking boxes on somebody else's list.
Absolutely.
Think more about exactly what you said. What do you want to do? What brings
Mhm.
you joy? Where are you interested? And that, yes, you can specialize. It's okay to only do the stuff you love because you'll do it better and with
Mhm.
more passion, and it will have more impact. So, what strategies do you like to help people put in place so that they can shift in that way and not get caught up in,
Mhm.
I call it the external validation trap of doing what they think they should be doing?
I see. So I think, yeah, like it comes back to the same thing of just trying everything, because obviously, uh, when I speak to, architects and senior architects and things, I'm on a very, I'm in like some very early stages in my career, I would say. So it's really sort of interesting to kind of see or hear about what they would have done differently, or what they encouraged the younger generation to kind of try. And it's most often is just to persevere and just do the things that you really enjoy, because and it's not kind of just like well, it's not treating it as like a hobby or anything in that sense. It's more just, so do you see yourself doing this on a daily basis kind of thing. And I think from what I've learned personally, trying everything. So I worked at a practice for about a year, and at the end of it I realized maybe this isn't for me. Maybe the whole 9 to 5 thing is not really for me. And the practice was great, the experience was wonderful, and I learned so much. But I realized that there's a huge difference in what I thought being an architect would be on a day-to-day basis, than what it actually is and what it actually entails. And of course, that's just been one experience. So my goal is not to completely dismiss it, but to actually try again and have another experience and kind of see where it takes me. And if it doesn't work out, then I'm all good with that. So yeah, I think it's definitely just about trying everything at least once for a little while, or putting yourself out there. Even I tell graduates to, get on LinkedIn, make use of it, have a go at least, because you never know what kind of connections you could make and how it could sort of send you on a different trajectory altogether. So yeah, that's one thing I would say.
I really am so happy to hear that you are willing to be that advocate, and even in your own life. I mean, it takes a lot
Mm-hmm.
of courage to say, I've got a good job, but it's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's not right, because I think a lot of people will slog away. They're really kind of worried that, well, if I leave this, is it really going to be better? Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
should stay, and they play it safe.
Yeah.
So I think it takes a lot of courage to make that leap, even when on the outside looking in, it looked like everything was fine.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you know though? How do you know when you should stick it out or when you should say, I need to try something different?
Maybe it's kind of just about taking it sort of one step at a time. So I think if you're sort of already in a job and you might want to try something new, maybe just give yourself a day a week to start working on it. So this is something that I do with like projects, for example. So for the past 2 years, I wasn't a student. I was working on the blog, and then the next year I was at a job. And so most of the projects that I was doing were kind of on the side. They weren't really my full focus. And even now, beginning university, I'm still kind of trying to find that balance. So I think if you're looking to do something, but you're really unsure whether to, commit to it and take that leap, I think it just be about doing it sort of, yeah, once a week or something, and figuring out whether that is really bringing you joy. Um, and then also, yeah, so another thing that I do with most projects is just plan everything out. I think having a solid plan is the best way to start, at least.
Yeah, so when you're doing that, are you also planning the experiences you want to get
Hmm.
from working? So if there's certain things you want to learn or skill
Hmm.
sets you want to develop?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think so. For example, in practice, I worked at a very small practice, under 20 people. So um, they all have a sort of way of doing certain things, right? As you do in most practices, like operating procedures and stuff. But I really wanted to take that a step further and introduce new ways of like visualizing plans or, creating perspective images and whatnot. And so I sort of suggested that maybe we try something this way and that way. And actually, that was taken on board really, really well. So it's just literally about, I think, if you have particular strengths, suggest them and it could, lead to something great. And now they actually kind of have embedded that into their workflow too. So now they're sort of also branching out and finding different ways of doing things. So I think it's a really cool thing to have is just being able to know when you can kind of take your skills steps further. So I think if you think about it in the sense that you're not really doing anything for a particular experience, but it'll help you grow as a person, even if you don't see it in that moment. I think that's really underrated and undervalued because people often think, okay, well, if I have to get a job, maybe I have to learn Revit or Rhino or whatever software it is. But actually, if you think about it in the sense that, if I give this software a month of my time to just create something out of it, then I can say I've got a basic understanding and it's not for anything in particular. Like it's not for a job in particular. It's mainly for yourself and building that skill. And then maybe down the line, you realize that actually it helped me or it could, set you on a different path. So for example, with MadCon, setting that up, I learned a bunch of skills about like video editing, putting together a conference, how to kind of interact with people, getting sponsorships. So that was kind of like a whole different area to grow, but it helped me because I think I gained loads of skills on how to communicate with people and how to kind of organize things on a bigger, sort of larger scale. So, yeah.
I mean, what is just so amazing as you've been talking, and we've hit on a bunch of different topics, but the through line here is that you are fearless. You really are willing, if something interests you, to learn about it, to try it, and to pursue it kind of relentlessly. Saying, well, let me just try this, and I'm going to do
Mhm.
it on the side. I'm not
Mhm.
waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and ask me or to give me permission. I'm going to do what I want to do, and
Yeah.
then I'll bring it back to them. I mean, I love that you were able to feel comfortable enough to make suggestions to
Yeah.
establish people at a firm on, hey, I think this could be better if we tried it this way.
Yeah.
So
And
many younger professionals are afraid to do that.
absolutely. And I think it's really, people often ask me, okay, well, what do you have to look for in a firm? Do I go for a larger practice? Do I go for a smaller practice? And usually for, someone who's just graduated and done their undergrad, the common advice is to go for a smaller practice just because you can ease into it. But yeah, and I totally agree with that because I think from what I've heard from people who have worked at bigger practices is that sometimes you kind of just get a bit lost and you don't really get to interact with, I guess, senior architects or directors on that level. But it's also really about finding a group of people or a company that really values your opinion as well. And that's what I found at that practice is because they were consistently encouraging me to research into, because they specialized in care home design. So research into that industry, figure out what kinds of things are being innovative right now, and how can we improve upon it. And so that helped me get a better understanding of that niche, like as a whole as well, but then also be able to bring my own ideas to the table. And I think, having that sort of very sort of accommodating nature was the key too.
And that's a great point that you
Mm-hmm.
need to interview the company just as
Mm-hmm.
they need to interview you, because even if you love their work, if it's not a good fit culturally, you're not
Hmm.
going to be happy working there.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you say are the biggest challenges that young architects are facing today as they navigate a profession that's frankly going through its own major evolution?
Um, I'd say there are a couple of and challenges. I think one of them is definitely that disconnect between students and architects and the kind of lack of information, because I feel like it's really easy for practices to outright say, students are underprepared and they don't have the experience that we're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of it's really frustrating as a graduate, and I felt that personally, is that you go through 3 years of creating these hypothetical, amazing designs, but actually none of these skills translate really well into practice. So I think that's what people are sort of trying to change now, is to kind of have that reality check with the education and say, well, look, this kind of approach isn't really going to help us in the long run. So we need to kind of bring that collaborative element. There's courses now that are integrating a placement or integrating work with practices and consultants. And I think that's definitely the way forward. So I think stuff is sort of beginning to take a turn for the better.
So definitely making the education experience more practical, maybe
Yes.
even having more co-op opportunities so you get to see for yourself the experience
Mm-hmm.
of working in a firm.
Yeah.
One thing I notice, a lot of my audience is more that mid-career architect, and in some ways they're kind of dead inside and they've lost that connection between all the passion they
Uh-huh.
had when they were in school, what they're doing now. And they've just kind of fallen into this busyness trap where it's all about, I have work to do. I need to
Yeah.
focus. I need to make my clients happy. I need to hit the deadline. And all of that's obviously important and necessary, but it's not the why.
Mm-hmm.
And a
Definitely.
lot of times I'll ask people, well, why did you want to go to school for architecture in the first place? And it really kind of stops them because of how far they have shut down from those early days.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you're still in a different phase of career, but any thoughts on how to keep that connection strong so that as you make career choices, you are keeping that alive instead of suppressing it to just do a lot of, task-based kind of work?
Mm-hmm. I think I've actually spoken to a few people who, even after their masters, for example, they say, actually, I'm just going to take a break from architecture as a whole. And I think that's such a good idea, because I feel like as creatives, we have the tendency to put our all into everything. And architecture is definitely one of those careers that ends up taking over your life. And this is where the whole overwork culture and, that kind of thing stems from, is because we are perfectionists. And so we want that sort of gratification of having exceptional work and, hitting the deadline, for example, and that sort of thing. So I think definitely taking a break sounds very appealing, because you do need that sort of step away from, okay, well, I've done this degree, I've had a few experiences, where is my career going to go next? But also, I think networking is quite an important factor, because I've been able to, for example, connect with so many individuals, and these are people who are mostly not they haven't gone down that traditional route. They're also doing amazing things for themselves. So I've been able to kind of see, well, this person actually, even though they were an architect for X amount of years, they then stopped and started their own thing, and it's working out well for them. So I think having those people in your network and in your circle is really important as well, because then you can kind of tell yourself it's okay, because they're amazing and they're really successful, and so that is an option for you too. So yeah, I think that's what my thoughts are so far.
There's definitely a line of thinking out there that is so true. You know, if you can see it, you can be it. When you see
Mhm.
something modeled for you, it doesn't feel so scary.
Yeah.
But when you only see one system, one way, if you don't feel like you fit, then it can come to feeling very polarizing as I either have to change to fit in or leave, and there's no
Yeah.
other option. And actually, there's all kinds of shades of gray there in the middle. But if you don't see it modeled, not only do you not know that it's possible, but how do I do
Mm,
it is
right.
another big thing. So as we're talking about the profession becoming more specialized in many ways, and you can specialize in anything, whether it's a philosophy like sustainability or research or things related to building science or related to computing and generating options. There's just a million different ways you can think about going, and you really can forge your own path because you can start to say, I like this better than that. I love your suggestion about trying things. But if we think about how all these things that are popping up right now
Mhm.
are going to eventually shape how people think about who are architects, what value do we provide. If you were to look into your crystal ball, what are your thoughts on how the profession is being shaped and the impact it's possible to have?
So I think basically I feel like the people who I suppose the generation before me have sort of grown up with this architect culture, right? Looking up to architects and looking at how they live and almost like a celebrity in their own in our industry. Um, but I think now it's kind of like this age for the younger generation to kind of do their own thing or be okay with not doing the traditional thing. And even if you do want to pursue that, that's totally fine. It's amazing. I think that takes a lot of hard work and perseverance and commitment. Um, so I think in terms of how the profession is shifting and changing, there is definitely a rise in people who are more open to the fact that actually, I don't want to do this. I have other passions, and there are ways to merge those passions really as well. Whether it's something like film or set design or social media, or whatever it is, I think we're now beginning to realize that architecture is also works as a stepping stone in a sense, and it doesn't have to be limited to that bubble. um, so I'm hoping that also brings forward a lot of positive changes in terms of the way we see BAME people in the industry, and how we're getting paid, and the sort of overworking, stress, all-nighter culture, which I absolutely detest, because I think it just, like you said earlier, I think it just undervalues ourselves, and we're doing a disservice to our craft in a sense, because we have all this creativity and we have all this passion, but we're not letting ourselves kind of be, I guess, oh, what's the word? Be, I don't know what the word is. um, just kind of, yeah, being fair to ourselves, I suppose, is the way of putting it.
Yeah. I mean, you've actually, I've heard you talk about procrastination
Uh-huh.
before, and you've also mentioned today perfectionism, and I see them as very connected. The perfectionism is a way to not put yourself out there, right? Because it
Yeah.
has to be good enough first. And procrastination is about having the energy and the motivation to do it. So they're sort of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, for sure. I think also like a lot of students and a lot of practices, even who are on social media, they refuse to share any of the behind the scenes or any of the sort of development work, for example, which I think is really it's a huge shame, because I think there is a lot you can learn from that. But also, I don't see why not. I don't see why you can't share those kinds of things too, because I think that's equally interesting as the final outcome. So I always suggest to students to, continue sharing your work, even if it's not in that final stage yet, because that will kind of let you open up to the fact that, nothing has to be amazingly perfect. Of course, like, we're always iterating, but actually there is also a point where you need to stop and just be like, actually, this is good enough. This is great, and you're happy with it. Like for a huge time, I was really unhappy with one of the projects I did in undergraduate, and I kept telling myself I could have done so much better if I had more time, if I had more this. And then I just ended up didn't really enjoying it towards the end, which was a shame. And I realized that in my third year, and I thought, actually, let me just kind of go all in and just try and enjoy the narrative or the sort of creating these illustrations, for example. And that turned out to be a much better project as a whole. So once you kind of, keep sort of slowly building up the fact that you can share these things online, then you get to a certain point and you say, okay, well, now I can just kind of share everything and it's fine. And, you then also start to realize that this can actually help other people who are looking at this work. And it's really, really crazy because I think as a whole, we haven't really understood the power of community, which is why I always go on about community, even, regardless of creators and influencers, students as a whole, practices don't really necessarily share that much on social media. They don't really kind of like put themselves out there. It's all very, professional and corporate and stuff. But I think if they started to, and some are, I think that would make for a much more interesting conversation and discourse, because then we can start to say, okay, well, this is how things are done in practice. So actually, maybe I don't need to put so much pressure on myself while I'm just a student, right?
Right. Oh, I love that. I love that. And it goes back to this idea of collaboration as well. And we can't collaborate if we're in a competitive
Yeah.
mindset, because we will take our part and hold it really close and make it precious
Mm-hmm.
until we feel like it's quote unquote good enough to share. And I love your point. You only need to be one step ahead.
Yeah.
You only need to be able to share the idea, because once you put it out there, the team is going to take over, the community is going to take over, and it doesn't have to have so much ownership.
Definitely. And I think, yeah, even personally, I've learned since coming back to university, I've been able to share these things a lot more on social media. And so I've realized that it's a much more positive community than you might think it is, because I know we've gone about competitiveness within the industry and people are sort of very closed off to their own work and to other people's work. But I've gotten so many amazing suggestions from people, why don't you look at this reference? Why don't you try this out? And stuff like that, little things that have helped me move forward in my design process. So it's all thanks to like the community, and you don't really realize this unless you put yourself out there. So I think definitely people need to start going for it and just doing it.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Sana, for taking the time to chat with me today. Just so much gold has been dropped
Thank you so
today.
much.
And I know that everyone will want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing and how they can join your community. So can you tell us how we can find you and what resources you've got?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram at 2.scale. I also have a blog, it's 2scaleblog.co.uk. And we also have an amazing little architecture community on Discord. So you can find that through my social media as well. And just, yeah, keep an eye out for any kind of like projects. I'm doing a few collaborations this year and also doing another round of the Scale Studio that will come out in the summer. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. But I'm happy to hear from anyone. And if I can't answer any questions, then I'll definitely direct you to someone I know that could. So that's what I always say is just, do interact and do engage.
Oh, that's so generous of you. So everyone, I know you got some great insights today. So go to Instagram, share what you learn, and Tag Sana. She is at 2 Scale, as she said, and I'm sure she would really love to hear from you and how this has helped you, and definitely make sure that you follow her and join her community. Thank you so much again for
Thank
being
you.
here. And I love the work that you're doing to really make people aware of what's possible in their careers.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela. I really appreciate it.